Okay, welcome to the winter trimester at TBI. I can't remember, what year is this? Year 11. Year 11, wow. So second trimester, so we are in the book of Haggai. We'll also be doing Zechariah and Malachi through the next couple trimesters here. So start of Haggai. And now Haggai only has 2 chapters in it, so you can kind of see the what the syllabus looks like for this trimester. It's pretty simple, and we may even get done next week. We'll see how things go. But your homework assignment, as you can see, the reading is to read the whole book through twice. Now with Zechariah, we'll have a little bit more of a homework assignment. You'll see that when we get to that class. It's really going to have to do a lot with a timeline, because we should all be familiar with the timelines of history. We'll be going over some of that in this class, but in Zechariah there's much more detail to some of the timeline, and so we just want to be aware of that. So that will be your homework in Zechariah once we get there. But in Haggai, just read the book through twice, so once this week and then once next week before we get to the book of Zechariah. Okay, well, there it is. There's your homework. Read Haggai through twice, okay? So when we get done with the book, we'll just make sure everybody has read it through twice. All right, when we look at Haggai, it's really important to understand the timeline. Can you guys read that okay? Is that fairly readable for the most part? Okay. The timeline is really important, because it's really hard to understand the book if we don't understand the setting, what has happened already in Judah and what is going to happen in Judah, what prophets are on the scene, and so forth. So I just want to point out a few things here. This is kind of a timeline of all the prophets, and you can see right away where this is with respect to the exile. So when we talk about the prophets, we usually break them up into different types of prophets. We have major prophets, we have minor prophets, we have pre-exilic. Give me an example of a pre-exilic prophet. Okay, Isaiah is a really good one, right? Isaiah spent a huge percentage of his book warning the people of what is about to come on the scene, and another huge percentage giving them hope for afterwards, for the future. So Isaiah is a great example of a pre-exilic prophet. How about an exilic prophet? What's that? Yeah, Daniel is a really good one. Ezekiel. I always tend to think of Daniel. You can even bring up Jeremiah to an extent. But Daniel, because he was there, and much of his book occurred while he was in Babylon. And so it was, it's a very apparent exilic prophet if you think of exilic prophets, okay? And where does Haggai fall? Yeah, post-exilic, okay? So here we are talking about the nation has returned to the land, and we're going to talk about that tonight, how that occurred, when it occurred, and so forth, and the role that Haggai has to play in their return to the land. So who is Haggai a contemporary of? What other prophet is he a contemporary of? Zechariah. Yeah, Zechariah. So Zechariah is the next book that we will cover. And it's interesting because their focuses are a little bit different. In fact, much of Zechariah is much different than Haggai. So it's interesting how God uses prophets to focus on pray with Zechariah, and we'll see that. And after those two, there are three other prophets that come on the scene. And it's kind of interesting when you look, because the scriptures, the Bible, the Old Testament, is not organized by, oh, this prophet came on the scene first. If it was, who would be the first prophet? If the Old Testament is organized by which prophet came on the scene first, which prophet would be the first one? Yeah, probably Jonah. Joel is right up there as well.
I think Obadiah was the 9th century, where Joel was 8th BC.
Yeah, and Jonah's up there, although his date might be somewhat disputed.
You have Obadiah and Joel in the 9th century, and Jonah's in the 8th century.
Jonah's in the 8th century? Okay. It's interesting. This has Jonah starting in the 9th century, so anyway, so you would probably have, Obadiah, Joel, Jonah, Amos, Hosea. Those prophets would come first in the Bible, but that's not the way the Bible is laid out. In fact, Ezra, the last prophets, Ezra and Nehemiah, they come before all of those prophets. So that's kind of an interesting feature. So when, we tend to think chronologically, and I know Tom and Dan have spoken about this a number of times, but the Jewish culture wasn't that way. They didn't necessarily think chronologically. So some of the books are written not in chronological order. That's how we would order them, because it makes sense to us, and that's what we're used to. But many of their books are written thematically. And so you have to rely on history to give you insight as to what part of the book actually occurred first, and so forth. So anyway, it's that way with the whole Old Testament as well. The prophets are not laid out according to when they came on the scene necessarily. Okay, so you have Haggai. What's the time frame for Haggai? We'll talk about this here in just a minute. It's post-exile, right? When say I'm just throwing out dates to you right now. When was the return to the promised land for the nation? About what year? No?
530s. I mean the 7th. No, the 5. First one, 536.
Yeah. So in the 530s, and there are a number of waves that went in. So you think, well, how does that work with a 70-year exile if Jerusalem was destroyed in 586? Well, Jerusalem was destroyed in 586, but the exile actually occurred first in 605 BC. Okay, so 605 was the first exile that occurred, the initial group that was pulled out. Now the temple and the city weren't destroyed until 586, but that's not when the exile happened. Okay, so 605 is when you think of the exile, the majority was exiled in 605, including Daniel, by the way. And then 586, whoever was left was exiled, and everything else was destroyed at that time. So 70 years from 605 is about 536, okay, BC. So that's when we tend to think of the return to the land. Okay, so all of those time frames come into play as we're looking at Haggai. Okay, and everybody should have one of these booklets. Did everybody get one? I think Dan was passing them out earlier. So you can open your booklet there if you don't have it open yet. To the second page there. The first page is kind of a brief outline. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But that second page where it has Haggai and introduction at the top, that's the page. Okay, just a little bit about the setting here. I just have this brief chart because it's important to understand what is going on here. When you look at Judah and Israel, and you kind of want to have a handle on the kingdoms and what was their state, what was their status as we're going through the book. So when you look at Judah, Judah at this time is under Persian rule, right? Who did the Persians defeat? And we'll look at some scripture verses regarding this as well. Who did the Persians defeat? Yeah, they defeated the Babylonians, right? So the exile took place in Babylon. The Persians came in and defeated the Babylonians, and it was really sort of I'm not going to say bloodless, but there was very little fighting that happen. Do you guys remember how that happened? It was actually brilliant. What's that?
They were having a party.
They were. The Babylonians were, right? Yeah. The Babylonians thought everything was fine and dandy. They were enjoying themselves. And what did the Persians do?
Cyrus diverted the river so that there was no water flowing under the gates, and the soldiers could march right in on the riverbed.
Yeah.
Babylon proper.
So the city was surrounded by a gate, which also went across the river. So the city contained the river. The river went through it, and they diverted the river. I mean, this had to take some serious engineering back in the day. I mean, thousands of I guess slaves to dig up a channel and divert that river around the city to dry up the land under the gates, and then the Persians just marched right in through the riverbed, and the Babylonians didn't really put up a fight at that point, you know.
I think it was a matter of timing too, the way they did it, so that they could stop, they could divert the water quickly and swab right in there.
Yeah, it would really be interesting to see some detail on that, because they had to dig wherever this water was going. They had to dig it out prior to releasing the water down this new channel. So maybe they set up a gate or something, you know, dug a giant channel around the city, and then when the time came, they just, you know, moved that gate and blocked off the other way and diverted all that water. I don't know. I don't exactly know how they did that, but you're right. It was done relatively quickly when it happened. I don't know how long it took to dig it. Do you know that, Dan? Did you?
I can't figure out how long it took it, but I just got to thinking how they would be caught off guard at least, you know.
Yep.
If it was something that was done slowly, they would have seen it coming.
Seen it not coming.
Yeah, not seen it coming.
Right. So the northern kingdom now, because the Persians defeated the Babylonians, they're now under Babylonian or Persian rule, or Medo-Persian rule, if you want to go by the more formal, because the Medes and Persians had ended up as a single entity. And so they're under Persian rule at this point. What about the northern tribe? Obviously,
It had already been dispersed into
yeah,
Syria.
they had been dispersed into Assyria. When the Babylonians defeated the Assyrians, what happened to the northern tribe? We don't know. Nobody knows, right? And even when the Persians came in and defeated, there's no mention of those 10 tribes. There's no mention of them at all. So you don't really know. That chances are that they dispersed from the Assyrian region at some point, or they got assimilated in with the Jews under Babylon. Babylon did afford them some freedoms while they were in Babylon, and it was to the point where the Jews had even adopted the Babylonian calendar and things of that nature. They did have job functions in there. So some of them, many Jews felt very content living in Babylon. So you wonder if some of those 10 tribes sort of assimilated themselves with the Babylonians at that time. It's hard to say. When did the Assyrians finally conquer the northern kingdom?
722.
Yeah, 722. That's an important date to know and to remember. Before that, the Assyrians were in the northern kingdom. We talked about this last year at some point, and I can't remember what class I was teaching at that time, Hosea maybe, but they had mostly decimated the northern kingdom. So the people in the northern kingdom were already decimated for a number of years before the Assyrians finally came in 722 and took them out. But 722 is the date when it is considered to be that date when they were finally dispersed. Judah, in 586, their king was Zedekiah, and he was deposed and effectively removed as their king. What did Zedekiah do? Do you guys remember from back in some of these historical classes? What did he do that the Assyrians did not take too kindly? I think it was the Assyrians. Didn't he ally himself with the Babylonians and slow down the Assyrians when they were trying to march through Israel? Is that right, Dan?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I think they captured him because of it and basically removed him. They didn't kill him, but they removed him. So anyway, after 586, there was no royal line, and so when they came back from the exile, there was no royal line to rule Israel at that time. So they were governed under mostly Persian puppets at the time. So anyway, that's kind of the setting and what it looks like. Even though the Persians gave them some freedoms, they still were under Persian control at the time. They did not have total freedom, which is why we still consider anything after 586 to be considered what? When we look at the history of Israel, anything after 586 is considered the times of the Gentiles, right?
I'm not sure I like the wording of no royal line, because then that assumes there's nothing between David and Christ, which we all know is not true. So I think, wouldn't it be better to say that the Babylonians did not authorize the royal line to rule as vassals and just...
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I understand what you're saying, but no royal line ruled independently in Israel, in Judah.
Zerubbabel was not a king, but he was certainly of the line of...
But still under Persian rule, right? So he did not rule necessarily. Yeah. So let's look at the introduction then in our booklet, and we can just follow along from the top there. So the title of the book, Haggai, is named for its author. Okay, you kind of have to say that because not all books with a name in its title are named for the author. Give me an example of that. Well, Psalms, but that's not a name of a person, right?
What about Jonah?
Well, that's a good question. Did Jonah write the book of Jonah?
Judges?
Well, that's not really the name of the person. I can give you some New Testament books, like Timothy didn't write Timothy. Titus didn't write Titus. So you have some. I'm trying to think of some prophets, but I can't really think of any prophets that didn't pen their own books.
Didn't write her own book.
What's that?
Esther certainly didn't write her own book.
That's probably a good one. Yeah. Okay. Haggai is named for its author. So the name Haggai is derived from the Hebrew word which means festival, and could be translated festal or my feast, okay? All kind of have the same general meaning. Nothing is known about Haggai's family or background, but all accept the authenticity of Haggai's authorship of the book bearing his name. Haggai's ministry in the post-exilic period is corroborated by Ezra. Okay, let's look at that. Somebody turn to Ezra chapter 5, verse 1, and somebody else turn to Ezra 6:14. Okay, who's got 5:1? Okay, go ahead, Nancy.
I'm sorry. When I first- Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, you want more?
No, that's fine. Who's got 6:14?
Ezra 6:14, and the elders of the Jews were successful in building through the prophesying of Haggai, the prophet, and Zechariah, the son of Edu, and they finished building according to the command of the God of Israel, and the decree of Cyrus, Darius, Artaxerxes, king of Persia.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna look at those decrees here shortly. The date of writing. Haggai delivered 4 prophecies within a 4-month period of time. So these were all written pretty close together. And now I want you to look at that outline on the facing page there, just to the left, the previous page, I guess I should say. And you see that there are 4 messages, okay? Now, these are all fairly short messages because there's only 2 chapters in Haggai. So if you look at the first message or the first prophecy, it's a call to rebuild the temple. Okay, now we're going to talk about that because when we look at the date of writing, we're going to say, well, they've been back for a little while and they haven't rebuilt the temple yet. Like, what's going on? So Haggai is calling them to rebuild the temple. He rebukes the nation. He pronounces judgment on the nation and obedience of the nation. And then I don't know what it means when it just says governor and high priest there. There's a prophecy concerning them. All right, second prophecy, part 2, and this is in chapter 2. The announcement of the future blessing. Okay, former glory versus the latter glory of the temple. And then you have the governor, high priest, and the people. Third message, a call to moral purity. I don't think that there's a book in the scripture that doesn't have a call to moral purity in there somewhere. These things are important because it's a warning to us as well. We can look back at Israel and kind of shake our heads at their behavior or whatever, but it's a warning to us as well. Principle of future protection. Okay, subjugation of the nations. When do you think that takes place? Yeah, millennial kingdom. Okay, that's way future. Okay, going back. Yes.
I think that where on the first part where it says governor and high priest, I think, is that referring to probably Zerubbabel and Joshua? I think that's who it's referring to, just even though it just says governor and high priest.
Okay.
I think so.
Yep. That first message takes up the whole first chapter. The other 3 messages are in the second chapter. Okay, look at the date of writing again, because it gives really good time frames in this book. You almost can nail it down to the day. Well, you can nail it down to the exact day. So Haggai delivered 4 prophecies within a 4-month period. His first prophecy came in the 2nd year of Darius the king, on the first day of the 6th month. Okay, it's like, wow, he really brought that down to. Oh no, guess what? I don't have my calendar on here. Doggone it. All right, I'll have to bring that next time. So when you talk about the first day of the 6th month, you're talking about in August, and this is 520 BC is when Darius the king, on the first day of the 6th month, so this is the 6th month of his reign in 520 BC. And it's interesting because they do still go by the Babylonian calendar here. So I'll bring that calendar next week and I'll show you what that looks like. So his second message was delivered on the 21st of the 7th month, okay, which was early in October of 520 BC. The third and fourth messages were delivered on the 24th of the 9th month. This is early in January of 519 BC. Thus Haggai prophesied between October of 520 and January of 519. So you can see that's a really tight time frame for Haggai's ministry. Okay, let's look at the purpose. Haggai's purpose in writing was to encourage the people who returned to Israel to continue the task of rebuilding the temple after a 16-year hiatus. Okay, what year did we say their exile ended and they were allowed back into the land? 536, and the prophecy took place in what year? 520. So that's 16 years. There's been a 16-year hiatus. What does that mean as far as the rebuilding goes?
It seems like they got thwarted by the enemies around them, and they kind of lost heart, and they failed to fulfill. So they needed a little inspiration to get going again. As I recall from when we looked at Ezra and Nehemiah.
Yep, and that was definitely part of it. Another part that Haggai is going to hammer them on is that they seem to be more interested in their own economic well-being, building their vineyards and their little plots of land, starting to develop that and get food and start their own business and stuff like that. Are far more interested in their own economic state than in rebuilding what they were supposed to be rebuilding. And that's what Haggai really hammers them on. Okay, but I agree, Dan, that there's almost no doubt that that was the struggle initially. It's like, they don't want us to rebuild. The people around did not want them to rebuild. They actually brought, I guess, what you would consider a lawsuit against them when they went back to Cyrus and said, hey, what's going on here? You can't, or not Cyrus, but Darius, and said, what's going on here? They're rebuilding. We don't want them to rebuild. And then so what did Darius do there? How did he allow them to continue to rebuild?
He sent and searched the records and found it
Yeah.
not in Babylon, but in Susa.
Yeah, and he found what?
The original decree.
The original decree by Cyrus, okay? And we're going to look at that decree and said, well, I guess it was decreed that they were allowed to rebuild, so we're going to let them rebuild. And it's amazing how you see the Lord's hand in all this, how he softened the heart of Cyrus to allow Cyrus to let them go back to the land and to rebuild. And then he did the same with Darius the Mede, allowing him to find this decree by Cyrus and then softening his heart as well to say, well, Cyrus allowed that to happen. It's already been decreed. We're going to let it happen. Okay, they didn't put their foot down. And again, all these things I think are ultimately the hand of the Lord. Okay, look at the purpose in the book. It says Haggai's purpose in writing was to encourage the people who returned to Israel to continue the task of rebuilding the temple after a 16-year hiatus. Therefore, the theme on the next page is rebuilding God's house. And then I do like the argument. It gives a really good overall view of the book. So in this series of 4 messages, Haggai exhorts the people to renew their commitment as God's people and to rebuild the temple. His first message was a direct call to rebuild the temple. Haggai rebuked the nation for the excuses they had given for not rebuilding, and he explained that the current shortages being experienced by the people are God's judgment for their neglect. Haggai's message pierced. And 23 days after Haggai delivers his building began. Haggai's second message was delivered on the final day of the Feast of Tabernacles. All the people were gathered in Jerusalem. Evidently, some of the older individuals were viewing the new temple with disdain as they compared it with the grandeur of Solomon's structure. Haggai's message was a call to take courage in light of God's future blessing. The people were not to view the new structure with disdain because God's presence and glory would exalt the house to a greater degree. Haggai's third message was a call to moral purity. The impurity of the people was defiling the temple they were building. Now that they were being faithful in rebuilding, God would once again begin to bless them. And his final message was a promise of future protection for Zerubbabel, the governor. Zerubbabel did not need to fear the surrounding nations because God would overthrow them and establish Zerubbabel as his signet ring. Okay? So after that, in the booklet, you have a couple of pages of outline notes, which are pretty good. And then you have a little message on Zerubbabel here, which I would very much encourage you to read. And it does talk about what Joan mentioned before about Zerubbabel being of the line of David, but he was still under the thumb of the Persians there. And then there's a chart on the following page about, it shows the kings of Judah there. So you can take a look at that when you get a chance. Okay, so there's another little historical background chart up there that you can take a look at, and you see the first deportation there in 605 BC. You see the temple destroyed in 586 BC. The 70 years in Babylon. You see, Ezekiel, Daniel mentioned there. And 536, the first return, and you see Haggai there in his name. So in 586, Nebuchadnezzar destroys this temple that Solomon had built, and he deported the rest of the people to Babylon. And so they were in captivity for these 70 years. What was the significance of 70 years? Yep. So you had the Sabbath laws of Israel, and for 490 years, they ignored those laws. So every 7th year, they were to let the land lay fallow. So in God's words to Israel, you owe me 70 years. And so that 70 years for the land to lay fallow occurred over this exile which occurred. So let's see. So they were in captivity about 70 years, and then Cyrus rises up as the Persian leader and defeated the Babylonians and allowed the exiles to return to Jerusalem in 538 BC, okay? So we're going to look at some of that. According to Ezra chapter 2, there was about, so Ezra chapter 2, if you look at it, there's a list, sort of a genealogy, of all the families that returned from exile and went back to Jerusalem. And it's estimated that there were about 40,000 people who returned, who chose to return at that time. So they began construction. It was like a little whimper, you know. They started it and it just fizzled out like really quick. They were afraid of the surrounding nations, and they were more concerned about their own welfare and how they were, you know, going to get their vineyards going and stuff like that. So then Haggai comes on the scene, and they end up really beginning construction of the temple in about 520 BC. But even at that point, even when Haggai had proclaimed, you know, these prophecies and said, you will begin building these things or judgment's going to come upon you, the locals still were discouraging them from rebuilding. And that's really where the story begins there in Haggai chapter 1. I want to look at a few verses here. And it kind of starts in Isaiah. And Tom had spoke about this when he went through Isaiah. But I think it's really important for us to see this and understand the whole context of all of this that happened, because Israel being returned to land is an incredibly miraculous event that happened. And when did this start? When did this begin? And how did it happen? And it's very evident that God's hand was in all of this, because Isaiah chapter 44 was actually written about 175 years prior to Cyrus even being alive. Okay, it's about 200 years before the decree of Cyrus happened. And here it is, Isaiah prophesying and using Cyrus's name. Well, he didn't even exist at the time, okay? And it's important that we understand that, because these things really give us a glimpse into who God is and his workings, his sovereignty, his authority over everything. Look at Isaiah 44 real quick. We're just going to read these 4 or 5 verses. Starting in verse 28, the Lord says, "It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will carry out all my desire. And he says of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple your foundation will be laid." This is what the Lord says to Cyrus, his anointed, whom I have taken by the right hand to subdue nations before him, and to undo the weapons belt on the waist of kings, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you and make the rough places smooth. I will shatter the doors of bronze and cut through their iron bars. So you see that Cyrus isn't just an ordinary leader. He's their military leader. He is going to be shattering these kings. And obviously, who is he referring to primarily? Who is it that Cyrus is going to be shattering? Yeah. Right. The Babylonians, right? So he's going in there to shatter that. God is using Cyrus to judge the Babylonians because of what they did to Israel. And then guess what? The Persians are going to be judged. Who are they going to be judged by? Yeah, Alexander the Great. Okay, and so they'll be judged because of what they did to Israel and their thumb on Israel all those years. So it's kind of interesting how that works. So God prophesies that he's going to raise up Cyrus, who didn't exist yet, to be an instrument to subdue these nations. And then, we'll look in Ezra chapter 1, but in Ezra chapter 1, the book begins, you can't really separate Ezra from Haggai, and that's why I'm going back to Ezra. I really want a good foundation for it, even though this is a short book. But Ezra chapter 1 begins with this decree of Cyrus. Okay, you would think, oh, well, when does this happen? Who is, you know that when Isaiah prophesied these things of Cyrus, do you think the nation really knew what he was talking? Like, who's Cyrus? Like, who's this guy? What's going on? Well, then Ezra comes on the scene, almost 200 years later, and lo and behold, there is this Cyrus. And what's the first thing that Ezra pens in his book?
Same thing that was written in the Second Chronicles.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't finish up Isaiah, so here's a couple more verses in Isaiah. Then we'll get to Ezra. Start in chapter 45, verse 3. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden wealth of secret places, so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name. What I found fascinating about all of these prophecies is why does the Lord do this? Why is he so kind to Israel after all their rebellion and sin, after all these years? And he says it again and again and again. And sometimes it kind of goes past us. But why does he do it? He says it right here for one of probably 100 times. He says, so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you out. He said the same thing when he was taking them out of Egypt. Know that it is I who did these things. And then he establishes certain feasts that they were to partake of, the Passover specifically, so that they would remember that it was him who did these things. And he does the same thing here. And he says, for the sake of Jacob, my servant, and Israel, my chosen one, I have also called you by your name. I have given you a title of honor, though you have not known me. Who's he talking about in verse 4? Yeah, he's talking about Cyrus there, okay? All right. I'm going to skip over to Daniel really quick, because Daniel has some interesting things to say about all of this as well. Daniel in chapter 9 says, in the first year of Darius, that should be verse 1. I know there's a 3 there. It should have been a 1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of the years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. So here's Daniel in exile in Babylon, okay? And Babylon had just been defeated, and it's like, wait, what's going on here? He's trying to figure all this out. And he happens to be going through Jeremiah's writings. And he looks, and suddenly in Jeremiah, he sees that their exile was to be 70 years. And Daniel's like, wait, 70 years is up here like really soon. Like it was really close to that 70 years. And so he gets excited. And it's like, well, what's going to happen here, something's going to happen. How are we going to get back to the land? We're still here in Babylon in captivity, even though they, by this time, had just been defeated. So he's kind of fitting some pieces together, but he just realized, hey, it's happening. It's going to happen now. And so he writes this and pens this, and this is really a warning to the nation. Hey, get ready, for whatever the Lord has in store for us here. And shortly after this, what do we see later? Let me go back. What do we see later in Daniel chapter 9 in one of Daniel's prophecies? And this is probably the most famous part of Daniel's prophecies.
Well, it's when Nebuchadnezzar is taken.
Yeah, he ends up talking about the 77s. that have been decreed for Israel. Okay, so this is kind of what started it, is like, wait, these 70 years are almost up. Now what? What's going to happen now? How is this going to, like, our exile is going to be done? What does it look like for us? And the Lord reveals that to Daniel, and that gets penned later on in chapter 9, the 77s that have been decreed for the nation of Israel. How many of those sevens, or how many of those weeks have been completed to this point in Israel's history? 69 of the 70 have been fulfilled already.
What about the last one?
Well, what about the last one? That's a really good question. Yeah, I think it's happening now, right? Isn't it? Yeah, and the amazing thing is you have theologians. My time, I am not a good time manager. The amazing thing is you have theologians who have looked at this throughout history, and who was it in the 1800s? George Peters, right? George Peters started studying this stuff, looking at this stuff from a Reformed perspective. In other words, he's taking the scriptures literally and trying to piece together what's going on. And he's looking at the prophecies concerning Israel, and he came to the conclusion in the 1800s that the nation of Israel must exist again for these things to happen. So he said, hey, good news, you Jews out there in the world. I know there's no nation of Israel right now, and you guys haven't existed for, for nearly for 1,800 and something years, but you're going to be a nation again. And he's stating this because he was so convinced of the scriptures, and that's what dispensationalism is. We take these things literally, and he took them literally, and he said, hey, there's going to be a nation of Israel. I don't know how it's going to happen or where this is going to occur, and but you guys will be a nation again. It has to happen. And then it was probably 70 years or so after he had discovered these things that it actually did happen. And of course, we know the story there in 1948.
It's a prime example of Presbyterian gone bad, right? Wasn't he a Presbyterian? Or was he Lutheran?
I don't know what he was.
He was a Lutheran.
Was he a Lutheran? Wow,
The
that's.
Lutherans threw him out because of this.
Oh, I believe it. They're
They kicked him right out.
yeah. The Lutherans are not dispensationalists. Yeah. So yeah, Israel's been done away with, and we have replaced them if you're Lutheran, right? So yeah, that's blasphemous. What was he thinking? Okay. All right.
Are they claiming now that Israel is a nation?
No, I haven't seen any movement towards that. But
I don't think the Lutherans have changed their mind, right? They're still saying we've replaced them. All right, so this is the prophecy that Daniel saw, Jeremiah chapter 29. For this is what the Lord says, when 70 years have been completed for Babylon, you and fulfill my good word to you and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for prosperity and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. And you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. Has that happened yet? And let myself be found by you, declares the Lord. And I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back to the place where I sent you into exile, from where I sent you into exile. Okay, so Daniel, these are the verses that Daniel was reading when he came to this, revelation while he's in exile that, hey, the 70 years are almost up. Like, I'm sure he looked at his watch too when he was thinking about that. Okay. All right. So all of this stuff happens. Daniel doesn't know how it's going to happen, but he knows it's going to happen. He sees the future of Israel, or God shows him those things in his prophecies later in chapter 10 for sure, chapter 12, and we see all of these prophecies of these great kingdoms. And then what happens with the Persians? Okay, Ezra, another prophet, comes on the scene. And this is the first thing that Ezra records in fulfillment of what Daniel had understood through Jeremiah. And Ezra, he doesn't even go into any history. He doesn't go into anything. He just starts recording this decree of Cyrus. And it says this in verse 1 of Ezra chapter 1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout his kingdom and also put it in writing. And that's what Darius had found later, saying, verse 2, this is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says, the Lord, the God of heaven. Now isn't this interesting? He's not talking about some Persian god out there. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the names of the Persian gods were or anything like that. He's talking about Yahweh. This is Yahweh that he mentions here. This isn't a generic God, the God of the Jew. This is Yahweh, the God of heaven, and this is part of his decree. I just think that this is amazing. And he understood that Yahweh, the God of Israel and the God of heaven, had told him this is what he had to do. And he writes it down.
How much influence Daniel had on him, as well as the scripture that he had on him as well.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Right.
and I wonder how much Daniel would have understood how much the Lord used him
I
for this end.
Well, I wonder if Daniel had seen this decree. I don't know. He hadn't seen it before he penned chapter 9 of Daniel, but I wonder if he was still around and he saw this actual decree. It was shortly after chapter 9 was penned, because the Medes had already taken over Babylon. They were still in captivity, but they had already taken over. So there was only like 1 to 2 years from the time the Medes took over to the time that Israel was allowed back into the land. It was a fairly short period of time, but we don't really have any record of what happened with Daniel there. So
It's my personal opinion that Daniel saw that passage in Isaiah that you were reading and pointed it out to Cyrus.
oh, you think so, huh? Yeah, I mean he was in a
Somebody brought it to Cyrus's attention.
did they, or did the Lord somehow reveal this to Cyrus? I don't know. I mean, he could have, but I'm not saying he did for sure. I'm not saying he didn't.
He had access to.
And with the position he had, something like that might be very possible, right? But what does Cyrus say? The Lord gave me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to rebuild for him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Go up to Jerusalem in Judah and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem, and every survivor at whatever place he may live. Remember, by this time, the Medo-Persian Empire basically ruled the whole civilized world. So every survivor, whatever place he may live, the people of that place are to support him with silver and gold, with equipment and cattle, together with a voluntary offering for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. That's the decree. That's a pretty widespread, firm decree, and of course that's the first thing that Ezra pens in his prophetic. Now the rest of Ezra goes into a lot of detail, but I just thought it was interesting. He just opens right up with that decree. This is how it happened. So that's all we'll go through tonight. I definitely went over. And next week we'll get into chapter 1 of Haggai. Chapter 1 should go through pretty quick, and so we might get into chapter 2 and maybe even finish it. We'll see. We'll see how far we get next week.